Hello, I'm Tom Ferguson and welcome to The Fundamental Molecule. This show explores the intersection of water, technology, and entrepreneurship. Each week, I interview innovators, experts, entrepreneurs, and investors in the world of water, helping us understand where this trillion-dollar industry is headed. These are the stories of the people building the future of the world's most valuable and fundamental resource.
Disclaimer. Tom Ferguson is the managing partner of Virgin Island Ventures. All opinions expressed by Tom and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Virgin Island Ventures. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be viewed as investment advice or relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.
Anthea Sargeaunt is the CEO and co-founder of 2S Water. Multivariate, real-time, non-contact sensing is one of the holy grails of water management. Getting it right will allow all stakeholders to understand what is in their water in real time. And if we can get it really right, this knowledge will allow a whole swathe of improvements in water management, including reduced chemical and energy use, reduced pollution, reduced fines, improved health outcomes, improving the pace and cadence of experimentation with new technology. The list is very long indeed. Anthea and her team have taken a fascinating pathway from problem selection to massively leveraging their equity through grants. She is an exceptional founder and person, and one of the best founder communicators I have met. And I loved her insights into the importance of public speaking as you're building a company. Please do enjoy my conversation with the excellent Anthea Sargeaunt. Anthea, how terribly nice to see you. Thank you so much for being on The Fundamental Molecule.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Excellent, excellent. So why don't we start with you walking us through your fascinating career to date? Because there's a lot to touch on.
Sure, I can do that. I've had a pretty varied career going forward. I started out my career in the oil and gas industry. Actually, I'm sorry, I'm skipping one. I started my career in university with my first business, which is how I paid my rent as I went through university.
Wow.
Because what else do you do when you're in university? Presumably study. And that was my first real experience with entrepreneurship. My now husband and I ran that business. Because also, like, what's the best thing to do when you start a new relationship is open a business together.
Famously extremely wise.
Exactly. Yeah. So, it was a great little business. We did everything from product design, manufacture, sales, customer support, all out of our own house. And it was a great experience to really learn all the facets of business, hands-on, and be involved in every little part of it. So
what was the one thing that gave you kind of the most whiplash? What was the one thing where you were like, oh, I didn't realize I had to do this if I wanted to do the other thing?
Ironically, I think the hardest part of that first business was really keeping very clean books was a big struggle. We weren't organized like that. It was just the two of us, very much a kind of off the cuff idea. And so keeping ourselves organized, keeping our books organized was a huge struggle in that first business. And it's something that I've really learned to apply in my subsequent businesses because it's such a huge advantage when you do it right.
Absolutely. Future you is very grateful to current you if current you is organized.
Very much so. Especially with, as you know, our company now lives off a lot of grant funding. You never know when those granting agencies are going to come back and ask for very, very detailed reports of what you've done. And now we have the foresight to keep all that stuff prepared ahead of time so that, when those things happen, we're ready to go.
That's fantastic. So sorry to break in, but after that first entrepreneurial experience.
Yes. So then when I graduated university, I went to go work for the family business, actually, which was in the oil and gas fields here in Edmonton, Alberta, which was another great experience. I did the very traditional child coming into the family business. I started at the reception desk and I worked my way up. Every time we lost somebody in the business, I moved up to that next position, no matter what department it was in. So I started at reception. I worked in accounting. I worked in HR. I worked in sales and marketing. I didn't know what I was training for. I was just becoming this strange jack of all trades in business. And then when we started this business, I suddenly got it. I was like, oh, this is what I was training for. Now I understand. And that was great. That company was a public company. That's where I really learned about proper structure, proper reporting, doing things, quote unquote, right, as being a great basis for going forward. Not to mention sales into heavy industry, which is, of course, the other aspect of my life now.
Exactly. But such a great set of schools of experience and sort of being able to then put them all together. And it probably took some time for it to percolate, to realize that you'd built up such an interesting sort of muscle memory across all these various elements.
Yeah, it took a while to figure out what on earth my career was building up to be, but it appears to have become something now, which is just lovely.
I'm still trying to figure it out. I'm kidding. That's fantastic. Okay, so after the public company and the jacking of all trading,
then we started 2S Water. So as you know, 2S Water have developed a sensor which detects metal and water in real time. So we are heavy tech, we are heavy science, and we are selling into heavy industry. We're targeting primarily the mining industry. So a number of things that each on their own I have heard are particularly challenging. And naturally, we decided to do them all together in one business.
I always think that actually what you're describing is the building of a moat over time, because if things are easy, lots of people can do them. And if things are really hard, then much fewer people can do them, which means that you can charge more and you're likely to have less competition. This is why we like these businesses.
Yes, good defense. And also like the path to an interesting and fulfilling life. I think if you're not doing something difficult, what's the point?
Yeah. There's sometimes I question. So walk us through the genesis of 2S Water, because this is a really interesting anomaly. And we'll talk a bit about it afterwards. But can you just walk us through the genesis and how you and your team thought about it?
Sure, yes. I founded the company with my father. And because I was working for the family business, we'd had a lot of years working together. So we knew we were a really great working team. And when we decided to start a business together, we thought the way to do it was the traditional way that they lay out in books, which I now understand is very uncommon. We went looking for a problem. And Tony, my father, had his requirements and I had my requirements. I really wanted a business that helped benefit the environment. I'd felt like I'd done my duty to my family in being in the oil and gas business and helping my grandfather and grandmother retire, helping my father run his business, but I hadn't felt good about the environmental impact I was having, and I wanted to reverse that. Tony wanted monthly recurring revenue because it takes two types to start a business. So we went looking for a problem. And this was the one that kept coming to the top, where we were very aware of it because of the oil and gas industry. You know, the metal detection in water is a huge problem in oil and gas. It was also coming to the forefront in municipal around this time. It was late 2017 when we founded the business, not that long after Flint, Michigan. Lead in pipes was huge news here in Alberta and up and down the Rockies. It's arsenic in the water. You know, it was a problem that we could immediately identify existed in more than one market. And so we went looking for a solution, and we sat down and started reading papers. And eventually we found somebody doing in a laboratory what we thought could be commercialized into a product. So we took that paper down to the local university and found a professor there and partnered with him and said, could you help us build what they've described in this paper? And our original assessment was that we were going to struggle on that moat front. We said, it's been published, so we won't really have a lot of defensible IP, but maybe we'll have a good product. Well, it turns out that, if you build a machine and you run it 3 times and then it lights on fire, but you still have enough data to write a paper, you're happy as an academic. Not so much the case when you want to put it into the field. So in fact, we did generate a huge amount of IP around this, because making a really robust industrial product versus running a rig in a laboratory is a vastly different thing. But it gave us the basis of the information that we needed in order to build this product.
Brilliant. So can you walk us through exactly what the product is and what the USP is for the customers? What problem are you solving in your customer's life?
So the product itself is a sensor which detects metals in water in real time. This is a huge problem for heavy industry because currently it's done through laboratory testing. So that means if you want to know the metals in your water, you go out, you take a sample, you pack it up, you mail it to a laboratory. 2 weeks later, you get your test results. Well, as you can imagine, that's not effective for process optimization. It's not effective for machinery maintenance and for environmental monitoring. So there's a huge need to have a more apt data source. It's always struck me as shocking that you can know almost any data you want on your phone, but it takes 2 weeks to figure out what's in your water. So that's really the problem that we went out to solve, is the data gap around the quality of water when it comes to metal concentrations.
It's absolutely unbelievable that we are flying blind on so many things within water, but particularly on this. Just as kind of an aside, the lab process so clearly sucks and is terrible. Can you walk us through why it's so resilient when it is so fundamentally bad?
I don't know if I can, because I struggle with that myself. I think it's a very entrenched industry, and it's very much presented as ground truth. When you order your results from a laboratory, it comes back with 6 decimal points of precision on what you have in your water. What people don't realize is that if you take the same sample and send it to 5 different laboratories, you get 5 different results. If you take the same sample and send it to one laboratory 5 times, you get 5 different results. So one of the things that we're really struggling with is how do we express the fallibility of the existing model to our clients when it's something that they've been so significantly relying on for so long and presents itself as infallible?
It just drives me nuts. I mean, one of the things, and this is not really for you, for companies that rely on testing, being able to run experiments. So whether you're doing water treatment, then send the resulting water off to the lab. 2 weeks later, it comes back. You can only run 26 experiments a year if you don't know what.
Absolutely.
It's such a bottleneck in so many ways, and I despise it. And that's why what you're building is so important. So walk us through from the lives of your customers. Just give us a bit more depth on what it is that's being solved and how did you come to understand that the nature of the problem? How did you build that 3D picture of really understanding why mining, what is it that sucks in the customer's life beyond what you've already said, and kind of the reality that you were inserting this product into?
Sure. Well, and there's 2 fundamental questions there. And I'll start with the first, which is how does the operator kind of engage with this and use it? And then the second being, how did we find that out? So the operators of water treatment facilities are really trying to optimize a process. They have inputs, they have outputs, and in between, they have to work their magic. Right now, they do that off a whole lot of skill and some really imprecise testing that you can do at the site. They're desperate for more data. We never have a problem explaining to these operators what they could do with 10 times the data. They know what they could do with it. They could take a process that's really driven by experience and skill and make it driven by actual numbers. And that's so appealing to them, especially when you look at these treatment facilities where the output water is going into, a fish-bearing river, it's going to a community downstream, and the repercussions of getting it wrong are so fundamental and so huge. I've always been surprised at water treatment operators. They're such a special breed of people. They really do it because they love it. I've never met one who didn't really just give a damn about the water they were working on. So for them, this is more than just how do I perform well at my job? For them, it's like a deep, deep passion. And it's such a fundamentally great group of people to work with. Now, there's also a second value proposition that we have, which is in-process extractive optimization. So the sensor can also see in what they call pregnant solutions. So a solution that's almost fully saturated with a metal, and a similar use case there. What's going into your process, what's coming out of your process, and how do you optimize it? Same problem. That data source in the middle doesn't exist. It's driven by highly skilled operators who've been doing this for years and have just a feel for what's going on. And that's not sustainable or scalable as you go forward. So that's the problem, and that's kind of the reality that we're dealing with for the power operators. How did we find that out? We talked to a lot of people. We just got people on the phone all the time. I think we're very lucky in that we live in an age when being an entrepreneur is kind of glamorous. I would just cold call a mine and say, hey, this is kind of a weird question, but we're a startup and I'd like to speak to somebody in the water treatment facility. And they'd put you through, if you ask nicely and have a good reason. And it turns out, water treatment operators don't get a lot of phone calls. So they're also willing to sit and chat for a little while about what their life is like and what they're experiencing. The other side of it was I think we were very lucky to have COVID hit when it did, because a lot of the mining groups went virtual. So one of the things that we did in 2020 was go to mining industry association meetings all across the country. And we'd sit in those meetings and I wouldn't even pay that much attention to what was happening in the meeting. I would just run through the list of everybody that was there and I would go and add them on LinkedIn and say, hey, we went to this meeting together. Do you think you'd talk to me for half an hour about what it is that you do in your life? That allowed us to build up this really comprehensive set of customer discovery interviews that let us know the problem in depth, as well as learning the language of our customers and how they wanted to communicate and becoming a name they knew as well, like a familiar within the industry, which is so important for these tight-knit, heavy industrial markets.
No question. It's music to my ears. I love that more than anything. And you have heard it here first. There is an entrepreneur or even a person out there who refers it was lucky that COVID came along. That's really awesome. And it's fascinating. And really what yielded was one of the things I was most impressed with when you were there. Though it's not like, I'd be interested to see how you're thinking about it. I mean, it's such a pervasive pain point for some people who are very large in terms of customers. Your first 4 customers that you were sort of building this towards when you were really engaging with them, as well as a fifth in oil and gas kind of field services, another major in that business. They were majors within the mining sector, which puts you in a kind of a minority of one in terms of being able to have those relationships. Now, there's various schools of thought as to whether those are good relationships to have early or whether you want them actually to happen slightly later. But nevertheless, how did those relationships come about?
Yeah, and it is a difficult proposition. So for how we engaged with those customers, a little bit of what I've already described. So making sure that we were around, talking to people, reaching out to people. I'm always surprised and honored by how much people are willing to give a bit of their time to help you understand their world if you just ask. So that was a big part of it. The other part of it was really finding industry organizations, groups, presentations that focused on bringing startups to mining. And the reason that that was so important is, in our early customer discoveries, we managed to talk to a lot of people, but what we didn't manage to do was have any way of separating out the early adopters, early majority from the late majority. We could get people on the phone, but we couldn't necessarily ensure that they were the type of people we wanted to be piloting with. And by seeking out industry organization events that targeted startup technologies in the mining sector, it allowed the innovators in the mining sector to self-select. And that allowed us to connect to the right people at the other side of the table who would take a risk on a pilot, who thought it was cool, and who would put in the time and effort to make sure it succeeded and wouldn't be mad if the very first second it didn't work and didn't care if you had to come out 3 times because they're having fun implementing new technology too. And that is really what you need across the table from you on your first few deploys. So that was kind of how we targeted them. And it took a little while to find those kinds of groups and events, but they were out there and they yielded so much fruit. It was well worth it.
What are the pros and cons as you think about engaging with very seriously large companies early? I mean, if you were to sort of sit down with somebody who is, or maybe if you were to sit down with past Anthea, would you still make the same kind of the focus though of the initial customer selection? I know that you've always been very complimentary, so it's kind of a no shade, but do you think you would have made different decision in terms of finding somebody slightly smaller and more nimble, or has it not made that much of a difference given the product that you're providing?
What I have found is, and other people may have different experiences, of course, but we found in the mining sector that it took the multinationals to have the budget and the attention and the capacity to do early stage technology deploys. We spoke to a lot of mid-level companies and we found that they were probably in the late majority. They really wanted to see those case studies, those referral clients. They didn't have the capacity to take a risk on something. So as you say, there is a lot of risk in going for big multinationals first. There's only so many of them available. We have a great capacity to build something wonderful in terms of a relationship, and we have great capacity to light something wonderful on fire. So it's always very nerve-wracking.
Nothing like high stakes.
Yeah, isn't the whole game high stakes at this point? But I think in the mining sector, when we look at it, there was no other real path to market than through the large multinationals.
Okay, interesting. So this was it. And that's really interesting. So can we just touch on crossing the chasm for a second?
Sure.
So I find it really interesting when somebody actually really instrumentally uses theory in the context of company building, because a lot of people do it tacitly, but what you just told us is that you use it explicitly. What's the process you went through to actually enact? Because it sounds like you literally did put customers into the pioneer or whatever you would want to call the initial part, the early majority, the early adopters, the early majority, the late majority. How have you ended up using that book practically? And maybe you can just say a little bit about the book itself.
Sure, yeah. So for those who haven't read it, Crossing the Chasm is about how there's different classes of customers, and it speaks specifically about what they call the innovators and the early adopters, who are the people who like to play with new technology, who will take a risk, who don't need 20 million case studies to do something, but want to test new technology in the field. And then it talks about 3 other groups, which is your early majority, your late majority, and your laggards, and how difficult it is to cross from those first 2, the innovators and the early adopters, into those last 3. Which is where the majority of your market rests. And the book is really about how to cross that chasm between those 2 groups, the early adopters and the early majority. Once you're into the early majority, then you should have enough case studies and enough instrumentation to convince the late majority. And part of the lesson of the book, I think, is don't bother with laggards. And when I first read the book, it sounded great, but it didn't mean a ton to me. And when I got into market, it suddenly became abundantly clear that these were real groups of people. And especially, we started to get a feel for it in the early days. Some people would be like, oh, this is cool, I'd love to test it. And some people would be like, can you send me 3 case studies? Can I talk to somebody who's got it deployed? Just a very different reaction. But it really, really clicked for us when we met our first innovator. And that guy was so excited. And he had stories about other technologies that he deployed. And he had stories about how, he helped other people with their technology deploys. Oh, we had these guys in the field and it wasn't working, but I knew what was wrong. And so we worked together to sort it out. And that is the kind of person that you need across from you. I know that in the book, he talks about innovators and early adopters, but I think that as a startup, it's those innovators. That's really where you need your first few deploys to be, because they are a different class of people than even those early adopters. Early adopters are excited about it, but innovators have endless patience, endless. And they're, as long as you maintain that relationship, they let you play around in your facility for a long time. And that's what an early stage company desperately needs, is someone with patience on the other side of the table, someone with insight who's willing to sit down with you and say, okay, what went wrong? Oh, you know what? I think I know. If you don't have that kind of insight coming from the other side of the table, it's hard to get it anywhere else.
No, it's absolutely fascinating. I think you're right. And it literally is everywhere. We're in very different businesses. But, in the process of putting together our first fund, for example, you really need people with the appetite to be able to be there and be with you, but also crucially be connectors, to have that degree of, confidence in what you're doing and the value of what you're doing, tell other people within their network about what they know. That's just my version of it. And it's fascinating because without the nomenclature or the framework or the structure, it probably would have been quite easy to miss the value and the position in the value chain of, that person saying, oh yeah, absolutely. And I've done this for others and it's great. And come on over and let's, see if we can solve this particular problem. I find it endlessly fascinating when the theory makes the leap to reality. It speaks to this idea of partnerships. You and I both have, great and productive partnerships with Xylem, for example. What advice would you have for founders about successfully navigating partnership? And how do you think about engaging them for specific stages of development?
Obviously, partnerships are completely fundamental for a company like ours. I mean, even just talking about selling to a multinational, an early stage company sale to a multinational isn't a sale. It's a partnership. You're asking them to help you with your early stage technology and to fund you with sales and to support you with their staff. These things are all partnerships, even if they look like sales or if they look like more traditional partnerships. Cultivating them is vitally important. And I think my tip on how to cultivate them, firstly, as we've kind of mentioned before, companies that have actual structure around integrating with startups, whatever that may look like, whether they have an innovation department, whether they have a program that you can go through, that's always a great first step. And I know many people are down on innovation departments as sales channels, but when we're early stage, sometimes it isn't all about the sales channel. Sometimes it's all about the partnership, and innovation groups can be a great pathway to that. And then, remembering the people that you're dealing with on the other side of the table, even though they're in this big, daunting organization, and sometimes it can feel so heavy because they have so much. They're this huge organization looming above you. It's that analogy of shrimp among whales. But
yeah,
if you forget about that and remember that you're actually just a bunch of people in a room who share a goal, whatever goal that is. For us, it's clean water. Everybody in a room with us always cares about clean water. We're all having fun trying to get something done. Treat them like people, treat them with kindness, develop those personal relationships, and the partnerships flow naturally from that.
It's a really interesting manifestation of this idea that happiness is reality minus expectation. One of the difficulties I think a lot of founders get into is they have these giant expectations that, this, XYZ large company is going to, drop everything and run towards their solution because it's the best thing since sliced bread, and actually know the world doesn't work like that. And so they then get down on the partnership rather than getting down on their own expectations being kind of misaligned. And if you approach it like understanding the practical reality of their existence, exactly that you would want to do with your customer, right? Do you really understand the reality of your partner's world? Do you understand what's important to them? Do you understand their timelines? Are your expectations aligned with it? Then there's absolutely nothing wrong with partnerships, especially for hardware and especially early. Do you think that's right?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, and one that is very, very difficult for early stage startups, because my number one job is to think that my solution is the best thing since sliced bread and to let everybody know that. And sometimes it's hard for me to remember that those people across the table, especially in, the innovation departments and the partnership departments, they're getting bombarded with people who think their solution is the best thing since sliced bread. You can't always expect them to have that same opinion or that same attitude. And you have to, as you say, you have to put yourself in their shoes for a minute. You have to be patient, look at what they're working with in terms of corporate structuring, and these things take time. And as startup entrepreneurs, none of those things are natural. We want to move fast. We think we're the best, and that's our job. But sitting down in a partnership is fundamentally sitting down at the table with someone who's the exact opposite on both of those aspects.
Yeah, I think it's one of these things that is, again, really, really underplayed or under noticed, especially people who it's their first time round the roundabout, which is the person you're speaking to, especially if they are, I'm speaking about myself here, they're jaded. They've seen a lot. They've been disappointed by people for a long time. They're definitely being promised things all the time, especially in that way that you said it, right? Which is like, my thing's the best thing since sliced bread, and I've got to convince you of this. It reminds me of this idea is that the best pitch or sales meeting is one where you do not use the slide deck. You bring it, but you try and make sure that the person on the other table is speaking to you, speaking much, much more than you are, because they're telling you all the things that you need to know to be able to make the sale eventually. What's much more common for that person on the other side of the table to see from you is, my thing's the best thing since sliced bread, and here's all the things it can do, and look at the widget, and look at all the things there, and it's great, and this is how it's going to. And if they hear another one of those, they're just sort of, their predilection to turning off is so high. I find it fascinating the degree to which people misunderstand that.
I think also, that's where you see founders talking about their technology too much.
Yes.
We almost never talk about the technology because my customers don't care how I do it. They care what I do, not how. If they care how, they're going to ask, and then we can get into that. But fundamentally, they want to know what data I'm generating, not how I'm generating that data. And getting excited about my technology is the best way to bore them out of the conversation.
Yeah. Is the data there? Is it reliable? Great. Let's do this.
Exactly.
We only care what the box does. We don't care what's in the box.
No, and the people who do care are going to ask, and then we can get into that conversation.
Yeah, exactly. With relish. Yeah, exactly. So another interesting set of partnerships is the grant side of things. You're probably the most adept entrepreneur I've ever seen funding your pathway with grants. Can you tell us a little bit about that as an economic and as a business building decision, how you think about that? Obviously, the advantage of being in Canada, but it's a real choice. You're almost the opposite of the rah, rah, hooray, let's go seed round Silicon Valley kind of person's saying too much on Twitter nonsense. You've taken a very particular path, and I'd love you to say a little bit more about it.
Firstly, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Well, you're absolutely welcome. It's great.
As Canadians, we get accused of that sometimes, of being way too focused on cash flow positive and not on Series A. But for a hardware startup, I think the value of having a strong grant funding network and being able to tap that grant funding network has been so fundamentally important to us. We have raised at least $1 of grant funding to every 50 cents of equity. I think we're coming up to $1.50 right now. And that's allowed us to move the project forward so fundamentally. Part of why I really like grant funding is that it, in its very structure, eliminates a lot of the social aspects that make fundraising hard for a woman in hard tech. A lot of it relies on my ability to put forward arguments about my market, about my product, how we serve them. And because it is mostly written applications that we put into grant funders, it doesn't put forward some of the significant barriers that are put forward in funding around gender and around things like that I have no control over. So it does level the playing field in a fundamental way that I find refreshing. Having said that, it's a lot of work. I'm not denying it's a lot of work. We're just in the process of doing significant grant funding right now, and I've spent most of this month hip deep in paperwork. Many founders I hear saying it's not worth it, and they don't enjoy that paperwork side of it. And certainly the first few years that we did grant funding, we did a lot of writing and not a lot of grant receiving, because there is a skill to it that we had to learn. Now that we have that skill down pat, it has been well worth the time and effort that it took to cultivate it.
I want to get you onto that skill, because I think this is something that's really worth pursuing. But I think it's this, you just identified this really interesting moat. It's like RFPs. Nobody wants to do RFPs because they're hard and sometimes you lose.
Right.
But if you win them, And then you get really good at them. You're more likely to win them over time. And the fact that nobody likes them means that you've got less competition for it.
Very much so.
So actually, getting good at them is a really good idea because nobody else wants to because they're difficult.
That does seem to be the state of things.
I mean, it's a little bit like building a hard tech startup. In that the more difficult it is, the lower, the lesser the competition, the higher the price you can use, the better your margin. Like, there are all sorts of accruing benefits to difficult.
Well, as you know, I'm a big fan of difficult myself.
Yes, exactly. Talk to us about the skill. Enlighten us about the skill. What have you learned?
So writing a grant is much like any other sales process. But what your customer, quote unquote customer, which would be your granting agency, wants to hear is something fundamentally different than your customer wants to hear or that your investor wants to hear. They are going to have a set of goals that are mandated to them that they have to accomplish. And that'll be dependent upon, whether they're, for us, a federal or a provincial, for you guys, a state grant funding agency, a municipal, an independent grant funding agency. Each of them are going to have specific goals that they want to accomplish. And when you look at the mandated check-ins that they're going to make you do after you get your funding, it's all about have you accomplished those goals or not. So when you write a grant application, the first thing that you have to do is understand what it is that grant organization is trying to accomplish. Is it more jobs in the region? Is it more economic activity? Is it clean resource impacts? And then you write your grant according to what they want to hear in terms of outputs and outcomes. That's not to say that you falsify anything. You always look at the path that you're taking and the outputs that you will have, and you report on them. But make sure that you're not talking about the things that your customer care about, but you're talking about the things that your grant agency cares about. The other key skill of grant writing, I think, is being really open to feedback and working as closely as possible with the grant agency as possible. Most grant agencies that I have talked to, if you write the grant and then you take your lead at that grant agency and say, will you review this for me and provide me feedback? 90% of the time, they are happy to do that. So they'll tell you what's missing. They'll tell you what arguments aren't fully built out, where you need to add more information, and then you can iterate with them in order to get the best possible product. What we often find is that our lead person isn't the end evaluation group, so it'll be handed off. So there isn't a conflict of interest in them helping us develop that firm application. In fact, it's an advantage to them because part of how they're judged as a technology associate or whatever their title may be is how many applications they bring that actually get passed all the way through. So really, again, back to that relationship forming, back to that partnership, make sure you have a good relationship across the table. Make sure you're willing and open to hear their criticism and be prepared to do like 20 different revisions. It's going to come back over and over again with changes. The more you do that, the more likely you are to get the grant at the end.
I think it's so interesting. Like incentive structures are everywhere, and you've got to understand the incentive structure of whoever at whatever juncture is sitting on the other side of the table. I think that's fascinating, and you should be applauded. It's awesome, and not enough people actually roll up their sleeves or wade in to actually do it. I wondered, so you're a relatively new entrant into the sector. I mean, you're only 6 years into it, I guess.
Oh, is that a new entrant these days?
Well, kind of. No. In fact, mercifully for us, actually, there are many, many more new. But I wondered if you could just sort of reflect on that time. Like, what has been most surprising to you about joining the water sector? In what ways has your mindset changed as you've gone through this journey? What is it that you would point to in that respect?
So I think the most surprising part about joining the water industry has been the people in it. When we first started pitching this to investors, we didn't pitch to water investors, we pitched to generalized angels. And the number one thing that we heard them say was, does anybody actually want to know? I don't think people actually want to know about the quality of their water. I think they'd rather remain in ignorance and plead ignorance. That has been so laughably untrue of our market. They really care in such a great way that it's so wonderful to work with a group of people who care so much. Even in the mining industry, which historically has a bad reputation for these kinds of things, the number of operators that I've talked to have said things like, our site limit is such and such, but we actually drive it down 10 times lower than that because we read this paper that says it's harmful if it goes in at that other limit. So we've, got the authority to drive it down below that, and that's what we do. Or, we work with the EPA in order to make sure that the water that comes out is fully treated to their standards so they don't have to treat the water upstream of here. It's just a group of people who care so much, and it's been so refreshing and so wonderful. And I love working in the water industry for that.
And I couldn't agree with you more.
As for what I've learned, I think, and maybe I wish I knew at the beginning, which this is going to sound ironic because a lot of people told me this at the beginning and they told me it in the middle, but you don't really get it until you like feel it and live it. I can't believe it took 6 years, and I can't believe it took as much money as it did. Everybody says it's going to take 3 times more money than you think, and it's going to take 3 times as long. And I laughed and I said, that doesn't apply to me. I'm magical. These things won't affect me. And here I am, 3 times as long and 3 times as much money. But people shouldn't let that daunt them. And you don't always need to figure out how you're going to solve every problem from day one. You can figure it out along the way. As long as you have good product market fit and you understand what your problem is that you're handling for your customer, you'll get there in the end.
And so you're only a part of the way through the story in terms of the building of this hardware. But, hardware's tough. It's difficult. Frankly, I think software is difficult as well. So I don't like things are hard is more is the right way of putting it. But, on the hardware side of things, it's a very sort of particular set of challenges. For the hardware entrepreneurs out there, do you have any advice on, things that you've done to try and, make it less hard, things that you've discovered that you've worked over time for those early hardware teams?
I think one of our biggest learnings, and it took us too long to learn it, I think, was to spend a bit more in the beginning to get some machinery that we needed to iterate faster. So, for example, we bought a laser cutter that allowed us to cut materials in the lab, and then we stopped having to go external for it, and it cut down our iteration time by 100%. Because we didn't rely on an external fab shop in order to make some of those parts. So when you look at what you're doing, where can you spend a bit more now to massively speed up that iteration cycle? And when you're looking at that, look at the numbers, because it might cost you $10,000 now, but if you save 2-3 weeks, you got your $10,000 back in terms of speed of iteration. So really take a look at what you can do to speed that iteration in the early stages. And then probably my second piece of advice would be really look at the environment that you're going into with your product. Because one of our big learnings has been the lab isn't the field, and the environment's going to be a lot rougher there. So get out into the field as fast as you can. Really, when you're doing those early customer discoveries, try and find out what that environment's like in all the factors that make a big difference, because there's no way that that's not going to be a tough transition. It's going to be tough for everybody, but as much as you can start thinking about it ahead of time, that always helps.
Can you talk a little bit about your experience in the lithium market in the context of needing that kind of ruggedization? It is not easy. Everyone was like, yeah, we're going to go into lithium. It's like, yeah, well, you know how to do business at the top of the Andes at like 11,000 feet? Maybe.
Yeah, that's been problematic for us. So to give this some context, one of the things we discovered pretty early on is that we can actually see lithium really well with our sensor. Another thing that we discovered is no one else can see lithium really well right now. There is no real-time lithium detection methodology. So early, we got a lot of outreach from South America. South America is a market we would just love to go into, but there's a lot of barriers to entry to that market, and a lot of them are around conditions. So as you may or may not know, a lot of the lithium is harvested from what they call the lithium triangle. It's a piece of land in between Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile, and the elevation is 14,000 feet. In the daytime, it can be plus 30, and at nighttime, it can be minus 30 on the same day. The fluid coming into the machine can be below 0. But not frozen because of the high sodium content. It's probably 30% sodium easily that we're looking at going into the machine.
Right.
This presented all kinds of challenges.
That's okay. Don't worry. We'll note the timing.
Yeah, excellent. Edit that bit out. Yes. So when you put a unit up into these kinds of conditions, it's really problematic. And there's no way to replicate that inside the laboratory. So how we're addressing that right now is trying to replicate it part by part. We found a high elevation application. So we tested elevation, and sure enough, there was adaptations that were required around elevation. We had clients send us big samples of brine so that we could run sodium through the machine for extended periods in order to see how that behaved in the machine. Because one of the issues around crystallization and around scaling and around how the machine is going to deal with these very caustic substances running through it. So as much as possible, we've been trying to address each different component of it. Because once we finally do get to the field, it's 24 hours of plane flights, 16 hours of rough gravel roads, all to reach a site in order to run some routine maintenance. So the benefits are huge because there's an absolutely colossal market out there who's desperate for it. But the risks to that market, I struggle to find a more difficult environment on Earth that you can deploy to. There must be some, but I don't know where they are.
No, it's really complicated. I mean, we have this other thing, we call it the Toyota Land Cruiser problem. Everybody always thinks like doing, just bring the product to the tough environment, it'll be fine. Actually, no, the difference between teams that make it and the teams that don't are people who know how to fix the broken axle of a Toyota Land Cruiser when you're en route to your customer on a tight deadline and still make it there on time. There's a kind of practicality to these environments that you have to really, really understand. And that's something we always look for. Passed with flying colors, by the way.
Thank you.
I don't want to make anything awkward, but do you have any reflections on working with family? And why are VCs wrong to be terrified of it?
I obviously am a huge proponent of working with family. So my co-founder is my father. My CTO is my brother. To make this more fun, I'm the youngest. So they're used to being bossed around by me. That's been a key thing throughout their life.
You've been limbering up.
Exactly. We've got, I always like to say of my co-founder, we've got 30 years of conflict resolution under our belt before we started working together. So surely we're good at this now.
I'm so glad you got to the resolution bit.
Yes. Yeah. I think for an early stage company, it brings huge benefits. I can sit down with my leadership team and never be worried about damaging the relationship. We're always going to be meeting for dinner or hanging out as a family at other points. So that relationship, many VCs feel hesitance because they're used to the husband-wife team. And the husband and wife team has a reputation of they're going to get divorced. The company's going to be torn to shreds. Well, I'll tell you this. You can't divorce your father. You can't divorce your brother. They're going to be around no matter what. And maintaining that relationship is vitally important, but it's an open one and it's a clear one. So it's a good, strong relationship. It's one that I value, and it's one that we work hard, all of us, to make sure that that relationship stays good, even when we're in conflict together. The disadvantage, I would say, is that we probably all think alike. So I think that one of the things that we view as vitally important is, as we grow, rounding out that leadership team with people who have very different ways of thinking so that we can mitigate that risk. But then how do we also bring in people where we can build those strong relationships and we can keep that strength that we've brought to the table going hard while we bring in additional viewpoints and additional skill sets?
No, I think it's really interesting and self-reflective. I think you're right. I think we were certainly very careful when we looked at it, but really understanding, who you were sitting at the middle of it, understanding your father and brother, exactly how this kind of relationship worked. I think it really can work very well. And we've got, I think, 4 companies within the BIV First Fund that are based on familial relationships of some shape or form. 5, actually.
My CTO always says he was so shocked when it was a disadvantage during raising, which it was. We had several people back away when they heard that, which is fine. I mean, people have to be comfortable with what they're investing in. But he was always shocked. He said, I thought the family business was historically the most traditional business format. Because throughout history, that would have been who you founded a business with. You went into business with your family. So we feel it's very natural.
So before we get to the kind of the final question, I want to ask a compliment, which is a question and a compliment. So you're a really good speaker and presenter.
Thank you.
Easily in the top kind of 3% of people that I've seen, and I've seen a lot. You've held your own next to 2 of the other really, really good ones, Sivan Zamir and Gary White, the latter of water.org. How did you get good? And why is it valuable?
I got good through sweat and tears and a whole ton of discomfort. Thank you very much, by the way. I very much appreciate that. I got good by being really uncomfortable to start out. When I first started getting on a stage, I would have a full script that I had memorized, and I would read it in a monotone voice because I was so nervous. Then I started practicing fake verbosity. So then I would be over the top because I was trying to figure out what that looked like. And eventually I got comfortable enough and I got used to it. And, the first time you get a laugh out of your audience, that's a beautiful moment. And you're like, oh, I think I can do this actually. So how did I get there? I got there through practice. I got there through a ton of practice. And I was on stages, a lot of it was investment pitching. We did investment pitching well before we were ready for investment. Tons of it. Absolutely tons. Every opportunity that we had to get on a stage and pitch the company, we took. It has paid off so much because standing out on stage, a lot of entrepreneurs don't succeed at that. They don't present well. They don't bring that enthusiasm to the stage. And when you walk up there and you sound unhappy to be there, I'm not feeling your enthusiasm for the product and for your business. I'm feeling the discomfort that you're feeling. It's a really, really important skill, and it's just cultivated through practice. And it really helps if you can learn to enjoy it. I do actually really like being on stage because as soon as you start developing that rapport with the audience, when you start seeing those nods, when you start getting those chuckles, then that's when all the work pays off.
The way in which it kind of overlaps for me is that when you see somebody who is clearly enjoying themselves on stage and really has done the work, because every story that really hangs together is the result of a hell of a lot of work. It's a really good leading indicator is that if you're going to do a lot of work at this, you're going to do a lot of work at a lot of other things. And if you're standing there, I mean, with some examples, if you're really bad at it, it's because you haven't done the work. And if you haven't done the work for this, what else aren't you going to do the work for? And then the other thing that comes back to your 3 times longer and 3 times more expensive than we thought it was going to be at the beginning. It's just really hard. And if you can't communicate the enjoyment at it when it's sort of table stakes, even if it is a performance, oh, yikes. Like, are you going to be able to get through the 3 times harder and 3 times more expensive side of things? 3x longer and 3x harder? I don't know. You just don't want to be dropping those breadcrumbs in front of anybody, especially when you're asking them for something. I think it's unwise. It is a learned skill and you've learned it admirably.
The other aspect of it is, you're presenting constantly. A lot of people don't want to present because it's so uncomfortable getting on stage. But you know what? It's uncomfortable having a discussion with a stranger about their water treatment facility. It's uncomfortable trying to sell things to a multinational when you're a tiny little company. A lot of what a CEO has to do is deeply uncomfortable. And if you can't get comfortable being uncomfortable, it's not going to be any fun and you're not going to do well at it.
Exactly. And you're much more likely to stop doing it, which for someone like me literally means the death of the company. It's one of the things, if you have to do it, it's best to learn how to enjoy it. It's like fundraising for me. Luckily, I actually do enjoy that. Okay, so we've come to our final question. Anthea, this has been so fun. Thank you so much. So what is the single most important piece of advice for future and aspiring water entrepreneurs?
That is always a tough one. For future and aspiring water entrepreneurs, I think go for it. That's my biggest piece of advice. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of work, but there's nothing more rewarding. I wake up every day happy with how my life is. And I know a lot of people who don't. And that could be you too. So jump on board and help solve a fundamental problem in our world and do something that other people are scared to do and enjoy your life.
That's such a great way to end this. I knew this was going to be fun. I didn't know it was going to be this fun. Anthea, thank you so much. You're such a gem. You're building a really awesome company and you're doing it in a really excellent fashion. So my congratulations. Congratulations from all of us here at BIV, and we will speak to you soon.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. As always, thank you for everything.